Hey all, it's Michael Laxer, editor of The Left Chapter, coming to you on March 27th, Friday from Toronto. This past March 24th actually marked a rather somber anniversary. On March 24th, 1999, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was was attacked by NATO. And as noted in a statement that we've published on the Left Chapter from the new Communist Party of Yugoslavia, the first explosions after the assault on Yugoslavia, which followed the attack by the NATO alliance, marked the end of international law, suspended the Charter of the United Nations, and opened a new and tragic chapter in world history. By this act, the leaders of NATO countries demonstrated that even the most basic provisions of international law do not apply to great powers, as the aggression flagrantly violated numerous international legal acts, from the UN Charter to conventions on the protection of civilians and the environment. And the statement that we've published on the Left Chapter goes on from there. But this brings me to a broader point, because one of the most surprising things that you'll see out there, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is the astonishing number of social democratic and liberal quislings who back and support NATO and the Western imperialist alliance that NATO is, while supposedly, in many other cases, being opposed to greater military spending, being opposed to Western imperialism, being opposed to Western imperialist aggression and U.S. aggression against places like Cuba, Venezuela, China, the American and NATO aggressive actions and posturing in the Middle East, and NATO's de facto support for Israel. So you'll have groupings of social democrats and liberals who claim to oppose these things, who claim that they are not backers of the Western imperialist order, but who either will not vocally oppose NATO or who actually support their countries being in NATO. This is a terrible, terrible mistake. Sometimes you will even, they will say that their country should lower military spending, or the military in their country should be reined in, but at the same time they won't speak out vocally against NATO and the NATO alliance. And I'm actually a bit flabbergasted by that, because the question is not how many imperialist dollars should be squandered on the head of the NATO, launch pins. That's not the question at all. The question that the question of NATO itself is entirely separate from discussions of military spending levels, because there is no level of military spending within the context of NATO that is acceptable at all. You could have a completely separate discussion about whether independent socialist countries seeking to chart their own path, what levels of military spending they would need in order to create a deterrence and in order to create, a national defense organization that would prevent imperialist aggression towards them. Well, that's an entirely different discussion. NATO itself is the central Western militarist imperialist alliance that is responsible for and wishes to continue, basically, to spread human misery and subjugation on behalf of the interests of Western capitalism and colonialism. There's simply no way around this. There is literally no way to oppose Western militarism and imperialism without calling for your country to leave NATO and to oppose the NATO imperialist alliance. There is no secondary option to this. And saying that you want to spend this as opposed to that in the pursuit of Western war aims is not a legitimate anti-imperialist or anti-war position. If you are, and as we are, anyone who is opposed to the racism, colonialism, violence, misogyny, and global agenda of hate and violence, literally of hate and violence, that is Western imperialism, must oppose NATO. When you see social democratic and liberal politicians who claim that they want to rein in the worst excesses of Western imperialism, who claim that they oppose excessive military spending, who claim that they oppose the adventurism of the United States in places like Iran now or globally, who claim that they oppose Israel's genocide in Gaza and ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people, who claim that they oppose the actions that the United States is taking towards Cuba, but do not oppose their country exiting NATO. Those politicians or wannabe politicians in any position that they are complete and utter frauds. If you are a supporter, if anyone is a supporter of any number of causes in the global south, from Cuba to Palestine to Venezuela to peace and coexistence with the People's Republic of China and the DPRK and beyond, you have to oppose NATO and spending on NATO always and in all cases. This is the only, it's amazing to me that that is even a controversial stance within the Western left. But the Western left, often with electoral aims, there are elements of the Western left that have sought to sort of chart this path, and it's an illusion, where somehow they feel that they can, argue against, as I've said before in this session, the evils, the worst evils of Western imperialism, while still supporting the NATO alliance. And that is a complete and utter illusion. It's, if you are not opposed to NATO, you are by definition in support of the US-Israeli imperialist criminal assault on Iran. NATO is providing cover for it. NATO is already providing logistical support. NATO is already providing defensive support, which is by definition offensive, because as it aims to protect U.S. and Israeli forces from defensive retaliation by Iran. These are incontrovertible facts. Even today, you can read in Al Jazeera when Marco Rubio went over there. The absolutely odious Marco Rubio went to meet with the G7 foreign ministers. The German foreign minister said that they weren't opposed fundamentally with the American aims in Iran. They said, there is no disagreement with the U.S. over Iran. Germany's foreign minister told reporters that Iran must not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, which, of course, it was not attempting to. All intelligence agencies and all intelligence reports indicate that it was not attempting to acquire nuclear weapons, but that is a separate discussion that we already touched on in a previous video, and must not be allowed to pose a regional threat, which is utterly farcical, considering that Iran has been attacked by surprise and illegally twice now within the last year by Israel and the United States, and considering that Iran is surrounded by hostile American military bases in multiple Gulf states. But that's just an indication of the hypocritical, farcical kind of nature of what's going on in the West, when they sort of go, well, we're opposed to this illegal war in Iran. Well, or what may be an illegal war in Iran is how they usually phrase it. Or, we want to see de-escalation and peace. But at the same time, they de facto blame Iran. But what it does more broadly is that it shows you that the NATO context is, when push comes to shove, NATO countries, NATO foreign ministers, the NATO powers that be, they will always back the objectives of the United States and Israel. And the only way that you can fight for your country not to be involved in these kind of escapades, not to be, de facto involved in Western aggression and U.S. and Israeli aggression, is for you to call for your country to exit NATO and to curb all military spending until until the country has left NATO, and then that military spending can be proportionally and properly spent in defense of independent national defensive objectives. So, right now in the country that I live in, Canada, the so-called Social Democratic Party is having a leadership race. And you've seen all of the candidates to one degree or another claim that they oppose the worst excesses of Western imperialism, but none of them have called for exiting NATO, which used to be the position of this party, the New Democratic Party of Canada, until that position was unilaterally changed without consulting the membership by the leader, Jack Layton, many years ago now. But getting back to it, they continue with this ludicrous position of supposedly opposing the worst excesses of American and Western imperialism, while not calling for Canada to leave NATO. And this is not an abstract point, because recently, just yesterday, I believe it was, Canada announced that it had reached its highest percentage of spending towards NATO plans and towards defensive military spending within the NATO context of 2%. But the goal is, Trump's goal is to get everybody to be spending 5%. And the Canadian government has committed to that and is already cutting in other areas so that it can facilitate the increase in the vast increase in military spending that this would require. It's not enough to oppose this increase in military spending, because this increase in military spending is being driven by the existence of the NATO alliance, which is not a defensive alliance at all. It is an aggressive imperialist alliance. And so, while of course increased military spending of this sort should absolutely be opposed, it must also happen in the context of opposing the NATO imperialist alliance. I think that this should be self-evident. I hope that moving forward, leftists will embrace the anti-NATO stances that they used to more broadly across the West, not fall into the trap of thinking that NATO is a necessity because of the situation in Ukraine, an entirely different discussion, but a situation that in no small part was absolutely provoked by the utterly unnecessary expansion of NATO against promises that were made after the counter-revolution in the USSR, the expansion of NATO to the very borders of Russia. That's part and parcel of why there is a war in Ukraine right now. And had NATO been dissolved as it should have been, had it not expanded as it did, there would be no war in Ukraine. That's simply a fact. No matter what type of farcical lies people want to peddle, that all the Russian aggression in Ukraine is completely unwarranted, things don't occur in a vacuum, and that's an ahistorical and absurd claim. But that's one for a completely different discussion, although we have published numerous analysis and articles about this situation on the left chapter, and you can go there and look them up. At any rate, down with NATO, end all support for NATO, end the NATO imperialist alliance. This is an essential step for making the world a safer place, for getting away from the constant ticking up towards midnight on the doomsday clock. There is no more important thing for people globally who want to fight for peace and against imperialism, colonialism to do than to oppose NATO at home and abroad, in all cases, always. Anyway, love and solidarity, comrades and friends. I hope you have a good weekend. Hoping that the Toronto Blue Jays win their home opener, and all the best to you moving forward. Hopefully, we will talk again soon.